Tonight we are going to take a slow journey back through time, far beyond the modern world, beyond busy cities, beyond glowing screens, beyond the constant movement of everyday life. Instead, we will travel quietly into the distant past, to a time when the world moved much more slowly, a time when journeys across land or sea could take weeks, sometimes months, when travelers followed dusty roads between ancient cities or sailed carefully along coastlines guided only by the stars. In those distant centuries, long before modern maps existed, people began telling stories about remarkable places they had seen, structures so impressive that they seemed almost impossible. Massive temples built from shining stone, gardens rising high above city walls, statues so large that people standing beside them felt small in comparison. These places were not only beautiful, they were astonishing. To ancient travelers, they represented the very limits of what humans could build. And slowly, as stories passed from one traveler to another, a tradition began to form. Greek writers and scholars started creating lists of the most extraordinary sights a person could visit in the known world. Over time, one list became more famous than all the others. A list of 7 remarkable constructions, 7 places that ancient travelers believed every curious person should see at least once in their lifetime. These places became known as the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But tonight we are not rushing through history. Instead, we will move slowly, just like the travelers of the ancient world once did. Imagine yourself standing on an old road somewhere in the ancient Mediterranean world. The sun is low in the sky, the air is warm and still, and ahead of you lies a journey across thousands of miles, across deserts, across rivers, across seas. Along the way you will visit towering pyramids rising from the sand, temples of white marble shining in the sunlight, colossal statues watching quietly over ancient harbors, and mysterious gardens said to grow high above the walls of a great city. Some of these wonders stood for centuries. Others were destroyed by earthquakes. Some slowly disappeared with time. And today, only one of them still remains standing. The rest survive only through stories, descriptions written by ancient historians, and the imagination of those who study the past. Yet even though most of these wonders are gone, their stories continue to travel across time. They remind us of something remarkable about human history. Across different cultures, across different continents, people have always tried to build something lasting, something beautiful, something that future generations would remember. And sometimes those ambitions produced structures so extraordinary that thousands of years later we still talk about them. Tonight we will visit all 7, not as hurried tourists, but as quiet travelers moving gently through history. Our journey will begin in the hot desert sands of Egypt, where the largest pyramid ever built still rises above the Giza plateau, a structure so massive that it remained the tallest building on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. From there we will travel east to the legendary city of Babylon, a place where ancient writers described gardens growing high above the city, filled with trees, flowers, and flowing water. Then we will move west to the sacred Greek sanctuary of Olympia, where a statue of the god Zeus once sat inside a great temple, towering above visitors who entered its halls. We will continue to the ancient city of Ephesus, where a magnificent temple dedicated to the goddess Artemis once stood among forests and hills. And not far from there we will visit a tomb so grand that its name eventually became the word we still use today for monumental tombs. After that, our journey will take us across the sea to the island of Rhodes, where a giant bronze statue once stood, watching ships enter a busy harbor. And finally we will return to Egypt once more, to the great port city of Alexandria. There a towering lighthouse once guided sailors safely through dangerous waters. For centuries its fire burned brightly above the sea. 7 wonders, 7 remarkable creations, built thousands of years ago by people who had no modern machines, no electricity, and no advanced technology. Only tools of stone, bronze, and iron. And yet with patience, organization, and imagination, they built structures so extraordinary that their stories still travel through history today. So now, as the world around you grows quieter and the night slowly settles in, take a moment to relax. Let your breathing slow. Allow your mind to wander gently into the past. Imagine yourself beginning a long journey across the ancient world. Our first destination lies in the golden desert sands of Egypt, where one monument has stood quietly for more than 4,000 years. The Great Pyramid of Giza. And that is where our story will begin. Our journey begins in the desert sands of Egypt, just outside the modern city of Cairo. Here, on a wide stretch of rocky plateau overlooking the Nile Valley, stands one of the most remarkable structures ever created by human hands. The Great Pyramid of Giza. Even today, thousands of years after it was built, the pyramid rises quietly above the desert. Its massive stone blocks form a shape so simple yet so monumental that it has become one of the most recognizable structures on Earth. But to understand the pyramid, we must first imagine the world in which it was created. More than 4,500 years ago, Egypt was already a powerful and organized civilization. Along the banks of the Nile River, farmers worked fertile fields nourished by the annual flooding of the river. Each year the Nile rose slowly, spreading rich, dark soil across the land. When the waters receded, farmers planted wheat and barley in the moist earth. Villages lined the river banks, and small wooden boats drifted across the calm water carrying grain, pottery, and stone. Life in Egypt followed the rhythm of the river. The seasons were marked not by rain or snow, but by the slow and predictable flooding of the Nile. At the center of Egyptian society stood the pharaoh. The pharaoh was not only a king, he was believed to be a divine ruler, chosen by the gods to maintain balance and order in the world. Egyptians believed that when the pharaoh died, his spirit would continue its journey into the afterlife. Because of this belief, great care was taken to prepare the pharaoh's tomb. And during the reign of a pharaoh named Khufu, one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history began. Around the year 25 of 60 BC, workers began building what would become the Great Pyramid. Imagine the Giza plateau at the beginning of this project. The desert stretches wide beneath the rising sun. The air is cool in the early morning, and the sound of tools striking stone echoes across the landscape. Thousands of workers gather at the site. Some are stonecutters working in nearby quarries. Others are builders, engineers, and transport workers. Teams organize the movement of enormous stone blocks across the plateau. For many years, people believed that the pyramids were built by slaves, but archaeological discoveries tell a different story. Many of the workers were skilled laborers who lived in nearby villages built specifically for the construction project. These workers were provided with food, shelter, and medical care. Excavations near the pyramids have uncovered bakeries, storage houses, and sleeping quarters that once supported this workforce. The pyramid itself was constructed primarily from limestone blocks. Each block weighed several tons. These stones were cut from quarries nearby and then carefully transported to the construction site. Workers used sledges to drag the blocks across the ground, sometimes pouring water on the sand to reduce friction and make the movement easier. Once the stones reached the pyramid, they were lifted and placed carefully into position, layer by layer, row by row. Slowly the pyramid began to rise. The structure grew higher each year as workers added more stone to its sides. Ramps may have been built to allow workers to move blocks upward as the pyramid increased in height. The process required careful planning and coordination. Engineers had to ensure that the pyramid remained perfectly aligned with the 4 cardinal directions. Even today, the sides of the pyramid point almost exactly north, south, east, and west. This level of precision is remarkable, especially considering the tools available at the time. Over many years, the pyramid continued to grow. Eventually, it reached a height of about 146 meters. For nearly 4,000 years, it remained the tallest human-made structure on Earth. But the pyramid did not always look the way it does today. When it was first completed, the outer surface of the pyramid was covered in smooth white limestone casing stones. These stones were polished to reflect the sunlight. Under the bright Egyptian sun, the pyramid would have appeared brilliant, almost glowing against the desert sky. From miles away, travelers approaching the Giza plateau would have seen the shining sides of the pyramid rising above the landscape. At the very top of the structure may have been a special stone known as a pyramidion, possibly covered in gold or electrum, catching the first rays of the morning sun. Inside the pyramid, a series of narrow passages and chambers were carefully constructed. These passages lead to the burial chamber where the pharaoh's sarcophagus was placed. The interior spaces are quiet and mysterious. Long stone corridors slope upward into the heart of the pyramid, leading to rooms built from massive blocks of granite. Here, deep within the pyramid, the stone sarcophagus of Pharaoh Khufu once rested. The design of the pyramid was meant not only to protect the body of the pharaoh, but also to help guide his spirit into the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, the pyramid symbolized a connection between earth and the heavens. Some scholars believe the sloping sides of the pyramid represented rays of sunlight, helping the pharaoh's soul ascend toward the sky. Whatever the exact meaning, the structure itself was clearly built with extraordinary care and precision. When construction was finally completed, the Great Pyramid stood as a monument unlike anything the world had ever seen. For centuries, travelers came to Egypt and wrote about the enormous structure rising from the desert. Greek historians visiting the pyramids thousands of years later were already amazed by their age and scale. Even today, the pyramid continues to inspire curiosity and wonder. Wind moves softly across the Giza plateau. The desert sun rises and sets, just as it did thousands of years ago. And the Great Pyramid still stands quietly in the sand, a reminder of the patience, organization, and imagination of the people who built it long ago. Our journey now moves east, away from the desert sands of Egypt, and toward the fertile lands between two great rivers. This region was known in ancient times as Mesopotamia. The name means the land between rivers, referring to the Tigris and the Euphrates. These rivers flowed through wide plains, bringing water and life to a landscape that might otherwise have been dry and empty. Here, thousands of years ago, some of the earliest cities in human history began to appear. Among them was one of the most famous cities of the ancient world, Babylon. Babylon stood along the banks of the Euphrates River. Its walls were said to be enormous, wide enough for chariots to ride along their tops. The city gates were decorated with colorful glazed bricks, many of them deep blue, shining brightly under the sun. Merchants arrived from distant lands carrying spices, textiles, precious metals, and rare stones. The streets were filled with traders, travelers, and craftsmen. But according to ancient writers, Babylon was known for something even more extraordinary. High above the city, rising in terraces one above another, were said to be the legendary Hanging Gardens. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon became one of the most mysterious wonders of the ancient world. Ancient historians describe them as a series of large stone terraces stacked upward like steps of a great green mountain. On each level grew trees, flowering plants, and vines that draped gently over the edges of the terraces. From a distance, the gardens may have looked like a living hill rising above the city walls. In a region where much of the landscape was dry and dusty, the sight of lush greenery growing high above the ground must have been remarkable. According to tradition, the gardens were built by the powerful Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II. He ruled Babylon during the 6th century BC, a time when the city was at the height of its power and prosperity. The story often told about the gardens is a romantic one. It is said that Nebuchadnezzar built them for his wife, Queen Amytis. She came from a mountainous region far to the east and missed the green hills and forests of her homeland. Babylon, though rich and impressive, stood on flat plains where such landscapes were rare. So the king ordered the construction of gardens that would remind her of the mountains she once knew. Engineers and builders began creating massive stone terraces supported by thick columns and arches. These terraces were layered with soil deep enough to support large plants and even trees. But one great challenge remained: water. Babylon's climate was hot, and the gardens rose high above the ground. Keeping them green required a constant supply of water. Ancient descriptions suggest that an ingenious system of irrigation was used. Water from the Euphrates River may have been lifted upward using mechanical devices, possibly a chain pump or a series of rotating wheels carrying buckets. As the water reached the upper terraces, it flowed slowly downward through channels and stone conduits. This allowed the plants on each level to receive moisture, creating a cascading effect of greenery and shade. Imagine standing within those gardens, cool air drifting through leaves and branches, the quiet sound of water flowing gently from one terrace to another, birds resting among the trees, the scent of flowers carried on the warm breeze. Below, the city of Babylon spreads across the plain. But within the gardens there is calm and shade, a peaceful retreat rising above the busy streets of the city. Ancient writers such as Strabo and Diodorus Siculus described the gardens in glowing terms. They spoke of terraces supported by large stone pillars and covered with layers of soil where even tall trees could grow. These descriptions helped secure the gardens a place among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Yet despite their fame, the hanging gardens remain something of a mystery. Unlike other wonders, no clear archaeological remains of the gardens have been discovered in Babylon. This has led some historians to wonder whether the gardens may have existed in a different city, possibly Nineveh, or whether the stories about them were partly exaggerated over time. Ancient travelers often relied on second-hand accounts, and descriptions of remarkable places could grow more dramatic as they were retold from one storyteller to another. Even so, the idea of the hanging gardens has endured for thousands of years, perhaps because the image is so powerful. A green oasis rising above a great ancient city, a place where trees, vines and flowers grew high above the dusty plains of Mesopotamia. Whether the gardens existed exactly as they were described or not, they represent something deeply human, the desire to bring beauty and nature into the spaces where people live, to create places of calm and shade in a world that can sometimes feel harsh and dry. If the gardens truly stood above Babylon long ago, they would have been a remarkable sight for travelers approaching the city, a living wonder of stone, water, and growing plants. And as the sun slowly set over the plains of Mesopotamia, the terraces may have glowed softly in the fading light, green leaves rustling in the warm evening air, water still flowing quietly through hidden channels, a garden in the sky. And with that image of quiet terraces and flowing water, our journey through the ancient world continues. Our next destination lies across the sea in the land of ancient Greece, where a statue once stood so grand that visitors entering the temple felt as though they were standing in the presence of a god. The statue of Zeus at Olympia. Our journey now continues westward across the Mediterranean world toward the land of ancient Greece. In southern Greece there was once a sacred place known as Olympia. Today Olympia is remembered as the birthplace of the Olympic Games. Every 4 years athletes traveled from across the Greek world to compete in contests of strength, speed and skill. But Olympia was not only a place of sport, it was also a deeply religious site dedicated to the king of the Greek gods, Zeus. The sanctuary of Olympia was filled with temples, altars and monuments built by different Greek cities over many centuries. Pilgrims and travelers arrived from distant regions, bringing offerings and prayers. At the center of this sacred place stood the temple of Zeus. The temple itself was large and impressive, built from pale limestone and decorated with sculptures that told stories from Greek mythology. But what truly made the temple famous stood inside. A statue so large and so magnificent that ancient travelers considered it one of the greatest creations ever made by human hands. The statue of Zeus at Olympia. The statue was created in the 5th century BC by a Greek sculptor named Phidias. Phidias was already known throughout Greece as a master artist. His sculptures decorated temples and public buildings, and his work was admired for its beauty and balance. But the statue of Zeus would become his greatest achievement. The figure of Zeus was shown seated on an enormous throne. Even while sitting, the statue reached nearly 12 meters in height. It was so tall that visitors entering the temple may have felt as if the roof itself was barely high enough to contain it. Ancient writers even said that if Zeus had stood up from his throne, he might have broken through the roof of the temple. The materials used to create the statue were extraordinary. The skin of the god was made from polished ivory. His robes and ornaments were made from gold. This technique was known as chryselephantine sculpture, a method reserved only for the most important statues. The throne itself was richly decorated with carvings, precious stones and painted details. In one hand Zeus held a small statue representing Nike, the goddess of victory. In the other hand he held a long royal scepter topped with an eagle, the sacred bird associated with the king of the gods. The statue sat calmly within the dim interior of the temple. Light entered through the doorway and small openings in the structure, illuminating the gold surfaces and ivory skin of the statue. Visitors entering the temple would slowly approach the great figure. The quiet interior, the scent of incense, and the towering presence of the statue must have created a powerful atmosphere. Ancient travelers wrote that the statue inspired both awe and peace. To them it felt as though they were standing in the presence of Zeus himself. For centuries the statue remained one of the most admired works of art in the Greek world. Pilgrims visiting Olympia often spoke of the statue long after returning home. It was not only a religious symbol, but also a masterpiece of artistic skill. Unfortunately, like many of the ancient wonders, the statue did not survive the passage of time. At some point during the later centuries of the ancient world, the statue was moved or destroyed. Today it no longer exists, but descriptions written by ancient historians allow us to imagine what it must have looked like. A calm and powerful figure seated upon a magnificent throne. gold and ivory shining softly in the dim light of a great temple, a reminder of the artistic brilliance of ancient Greece. And as we leave the quiet sanctuary of Olympia behind, our journey continues across the ancient Mediterranean world. Our next destination is the city of Ephesus, where one of the largest and most beautiful temples ever built once stood, the Temple of Artemis. Our journey now continues to the western coast of what is today modern Turkey. Here, near the edge of the Aegean Sea, once stood the ancient city of Ephesus. In ancient times, Ephesus was one of the most important cities of the Mediterranean world. Ships arrived daily in its busy harbor, bringing goods from distant lands. Merchants filled the streets, selling spices, fabrics, pottery, and precious metals. Travelers from many regions passed through the city. But Ephesus was known for something even more impressive than its trade. It was home to one of the largest and most beautiful temples ever built in the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis. Artemis was an important goddess in Greek religion. She was associated with nature, wildlife, and the moon. Many people believed she protected animals and wild places, and she was deeply respected across the Greek world. Because of her importance, the people of Ephesus decided to build a temple unlike any other. Construction began many centuries before the time of the Roman Empire. Builders selected a wide open area near the city and began raising an enormous structure made almost entirely of marble. The scale of the temple was astonishing. It was far larger than most temples of the ancient world. More than 100 tall columns surrounded the structure, each one rising high above the ground. These columns were carved from solid marble and carefully placed in long, elegant rows. When sunlight touched the white marble surfaces, the temple would have glowed brightly against the sky. Visitors approaching the temple would first see its massive staircase leading upward to the entrance. Above the steps stood rows of tall columns supporting the roof. Inside, the temple housed a sacred statue of the goddess Artemis. Pilgrims traveled from across the Mediterranean world to visit this place. Some came to offer gifts to the goddess. Others came simply to see the enormous temple that had become famous throughout the ancient world. Markets and small shops often appeared near the temple, selling small statues and offerings dedicated to Artemis. The temple became not only a religious center, but also a gathering place for the city itself. For many centuries, the Temple of Artemis stood proudly at Ephesus. But the history of the temple was not always peaceful. At one point, the temple was deliberately destroyed by a man who wished to make his name famous through the act. The destruction shocked the ancient world, yet the people of Ephesus refused to let their great temple disappear. They rebuilt it. The new temple was even larger and more impressive than the one before it. Once again, the marble columns rose high above the ground, and pilgrims returned to admire the structure. Ancient writers often said that the Temple of Artemis was the most beautiful building they had ever seen. Compared with the other wonders of the world, the temple stood out not only for its size but also for its elegance. Unfortunately, like many structures from the ancient world, the temple did not survive forever. Over time, wars, earthquakes, and changing civilizations slowly brought the temple to ruin. Today, only a few columns remain standing in the place where the great temple once stood. Yet even in ruins, the site still carries a quiet sense of history. Long ago, this was a place where thousands of people gathered beneath shining marble columns, a place of worship, community, and beauty. And as we leave the quiet ruins of Ephesus behind, our journey continues along the shores of the ancient Mediterranean. Not far away once stood another remarkable structure, a monument built not for a god, but for a ruler whose name would become part of the language we still use today, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. Our journey now continues along the coast of the Aegean Sea to another ancient city. This city was known as Halicarnassus. Today the place is called Bodrum, located in modern Turkey, but in ancient times Halicarnassus was a thriving coastal city surrounded by hills and overlooking the calm waters of the Mediterranean. Ships arrived in its harbor carrying goods and travelers from across the Greek world. But Halicarnassus became famous not for its harbor or markets, but for a monument built to honor a single ruler. His name was Mausolus. Mausolus ruled the region during the 4th century BC. He was a powerful leader who expanded and strengthened his kingdom, and during his reign Halicarnassus grew into an important and prosperous city. When Mausolus died, his wife Artemisia wished to create a monument that would preserve his memory for generations. She ordered the construction of an enormous tomb, not a simple burial place, but a grand structure that combined beauty, art, and architecture on an impressive scale. The monument that rose above the city would later become known as the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. The structure was unlike anything that had been built before. At its base stood a large rectangular platform made from carefully cut stone blocks. This platform formed the foundation for the rest of the monument. Above the base rose a ring of tall columns arranged in a rectangular shape. These columns supported the upper part of the structure and gave the building an elegant and balanced appearance. Inside this columned section stood the burial chamber, where Mausolus was laid to rest. Above the columns rose a stepped pyramid roof made of stone blocks arranged in gradually narrowing layers. And at the very top of the structure stood a sculpture of a chariot drawn by 4 horses. Within the chariot stood statues believed to represent Mausolus and Artemisia themselves. The entire monument reached a height of around 45 meters, making it one of the tallest structures of its time. But the size of the mausoleum was only part of what made it extraordinary. The monument was decorated with detailed sculptures created by some of the finest artists in the Greek world. Carved figures of warriors, animals, and mythological scenes covered many parts of the building. These sculptures were carefully designed to bring movement and life to the stone surfaces. Visitors approaching the mausoleum would have seen sunlight striking the pale stone, highlighting the intricate carvings and the tall columns rising above the city. The monument stood not only as a tomb, but also as a work of art. Travelers visiting Halicarnassus often spoke of the beauty and craftsmanship of the structure. Its design was so remarkable that the name of the ruler buried there eventually became part of everyday language. Today, the word mausoleum is used to describe a grand tomb or monumental burial structure, and that word comes directly from the name Mausolus. Like many ancient structures, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus did not survive forever. Over the centuries, earthquakes gradually damaged the building. Large parts of the structure collapsed, and stones from the ruins were later reused in nearby constructions. Today, only fragments of the mausoleum remain, but archaeologists have discovered pieces of its sculptures and foundations, allowing historians to imagine what the monument once looked like. A tall and elegant structure rising above the city, columns surrounding a quiet burial chamber, a stone pyramid reaching toward the sky, and a chariot sculpture standing proudly at the top, a monument built to remember a ruler long after his lifetime had passed. As we leave the quiet hills of Halicarnassus behind, our journey across the ancient world continues. Our next destination lies across the sea on a sunlit island, an island where a statue once stood so tall that sailors approaching the harbor could see it from far out on the water, the Colossus of Rhodes. Our journey now continues across the blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea to the island of Rhodes. Rhodes lies near the coast of what is now modern Turkey, and in ancient times it was one of the most powerful and prosperous island cities in the region. The people of Rhodes were skilled sailors and traders. Their ships traveled across the Mediterranean carrying goods between distant ports. Because of its strong navy and busy harbor, the city became wealthy and well known throughout the ancient world. But Rhodes became even more famous because of a statue so enormous that it was counted among the greatest wonders ever built, the Colossus of Rhodes. The story of the Colossus begins with a moment of victory. In the years after the death of Alexander the Great, many powerful rulers fought for control of his former empire. During this time, the city of Rhodes was attacked by a large army that attempted to capture the island. The siege lasted for many months, but the people of Rhodes successfully defended their city. When the attacking army finally withdrew, they left behind many weapons and large pieces of military equipment that had been used during the siege. The citizens of Rhodes decided to sell these materials and use the money for something remarkable. They would build a statue to honor Helios, the Greek sun god, who they believed protected their city. Construction of the statue began around the year 292 BC. The sculptor responsible for the project was named Chares of Lindos. He designed a statue unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Colossus would stand approximately 33 meters tall, roughly the height of a modern 10-story building. The statue was made primarily from bronze plates that were carefully attached to a strong internal framework made of iron and stone. Workers slowly assembled the statue piece by piece. As the structure grew taller, earth ramps were likely built around it so workers could reach higher sections while attaching the bronze plates. Over the course of many years, the statue slowly took shape. the figure represented Helios, the sun god. Ancient descriptions suggest that Helios was shown standing upright, possibly with a crown of rays around his head representing the light of the sun. From the harbor, the statue must have been an impressive sight. Ships approaching Rhodes would see the shining bronze figure rising high above the city. Under the bright Mediterranean sunlight, the bronze surface would have reflected light across the harbor waters. The statue became a powerful symbol of the strength and independence of Rhodes. For decades, the Colossus stood proudly near the harbor, watching over the busy port and the ships that sailed in and out each day. But the life of the statue was surprisingly short. About 50 years after it was completed, a powerful earthquake struck the island of Rhodes. The ground shook violently, and the enormous statue collapsed. The bronze figure broke apart and fell to the ground. Even in ruins, however, the Colossus continued to amaze travelers. Ancient writers described visitors walking among the fallen pieces of the statue, marveling at the size of the fragments. Some said that even the statue's thumb was so large that few people could wrap their arms around it. For many centuries, the broken remains of the Colossus lay on the ground near the harbor. Eventually, the bronze pieces were removed and sold, and the great statue disappeared. Today, nothing of the Colossus remains. But the story of the statue continues to capture the imagination. A giant bronze figure, once standing beside the sea, a symbol of victory and pride for an ancient island city. And as the sun slowly sets over the harbor of Rhodes, our journey across the ancient world continues. Our final wonder takes us back to Egypt once again. But this time we travel not to the pyramids of the desert, but to the great coastal city of Alexandria. There, long ago, a tower of light once stood beside the sea. The Lighthouse of Alexandria. Our journey now returns to the shores of Egypt, but this time not to the quiet desert plateau of Giza. Instead, we travel north to the edge of the Mediterranean Sea, where one of the greatest cities of the ancient world once stood, Alexandria. The city was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. After his death, it quickly grew into one of the most important centers of trade, learning and culture in the entire Mediterranean world. Ships arrived daily from distant lands. Grain from Egypt, spices from the east, and goods from across the Mediterranean passed through the busy harbor of Alexandria. The city became famous for its great library, its scholars, and its vibrant streets filled with merchants and travelers. But the harbor of Alexandria presented a challenge. Hidden rocks and shallow waters made navigation difficult for ships approaching the city, especially at night or during bad weather. To solve this problem, the rulers of Egypt decided to build something extraordinary, a lighthouse unlike anything the world had ever seen. The structure was built on a small island just off the coast of Alexandria called Pharos. Because of this location, the lighthouse eventually became known as the Pharos of Alexandria. Construction likely began during the reign of Ptolemy I and was completed under his son Ptolemy II in the 3rd century BC. The finished lighthouse was enormous. Ancient descriptions suggest that it stood more than 100 meters tall, making it one of the tallest structures of the ancient world. The tower was built in several sections. At the base stood a large square platform made of massive stone blocks. This strong foundation supported the tall structure above it. Above the base rose a tall octagonal tower, and at the very top stood a circular section that housed the great beacon fire. During the day, polished metal mirrors may have been used to reflect sunlight far out across the sea. At night, a large fire burned at the top of the tower, creating a bright guiding light for sailors approaching the harbor. From far out on the Mediterranean Sea, ships could see the light of Alexandria and safely guide themselves toward the city. For sailors who had spent days or weeks crossing open water, the sight of the lighthouse must have been reassuring, a signal that land was near, a sign that the journey was almost over. The lighthouse was not only practical, but also beautiful. Ancient writers described statues decorating parts of the structure and the bright stone tower rising proudly above the waves. For centuries, the pharaohs of Alexandria served as a symbol of the city. Travelers arriving by ship would see the tall tower standing against the sky long before the rest of the city came into view. It was a beacon of safety and guidance in a world where navigation was often uncertain. But like many of the ancient wonders, the lighthouse did not survive forever. Over many centuries, a series of powerful earthquakes struck the region. These earthquakes gradually damaged the structure. Large sections of the tower collapsed, and eventually the once magnificent lighthouse disappeared. Today, the lighthouse itself is gone, but underwater explorations near the harbor of Alexandria have discovered large stone blocks that once belonged to the structure. These fallen stones rest quietly beneath the water, reminders of the enormous tower that once guided sailors through the darkness. And with the story of the lighthouse, our journey through the 7 wonders of the ancient world slowly comes to an end. 7 extraordinary creations built thousands of years ago. Some lasted for centuries, others disappeared more quickly. Yet their stories have continued to travel across time. Even though most of the wonders no longer stand, they remain powerful symbols of human imagination, determination, and creativity. From the shining pyramids of Egypt, to the green terraces of Babylon, to towering statues, temples, and monuments across the ancient Mediterranean. They remind us that people long ago dreamed of building things that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. And in many ways they succeeded, because even now, thousands of years later, we still remember them. And now, as our journey through the ancient world slowly comes to an end, we can take a quiet moment to reflect on these remarkable creations. Thousands of years ago, long before modern technology, cranes or machines, people across different civilizations built structures that inspired awe in everyone who saw them. Each of the 7 wonders told a story about the culture that created it. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid rose from the desert sands as a monument to a powerful pharaoh and a belief in life beyond death. In the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, stories were told of gardens rising high above the city of Babylon, filled with flowing water and green trees. In Greece, artists and craftsmen created magnificent temples and statues dedicated to their gods. On distant islands and busy harbors, enormous statues and towers stood as symbols of pride, protection, and guidance. These wonders were built with patience, with careful planning, and with the effort of thousands of people working together over many years, stone by stone, column by column, block by block. For the travelers of the ancient world, visiting these places must have been an unforgettable experience. Imagine approaching the shining white sides of the Great Pyramid as the sun rises over the desert, or walking through cool shaded gardens above the city of Babylon while water flows gently between terraces. Imagine entering a quiet temple in Greece and looking up at a statue of Zeus towering high above you, or sailing toward a harbor and seeing a giant bronze figure standing proudly near the shoreline. And finally, after a long journey across the sea, spotting the bright fire of a lighthouse guiding you safely toward land. Each wonder represented not only skill and ambition, but also imagination. They were reminders that humans have always been driven to build something greater than themselves, something that might last for generations, something that might inspire wonder in people they would never meet. Over time, earthquakes, wars, and the slow passage of centuries caused most of these wonders to disappear. Stone collapsed, bronze was melted down, temples and statues faded into ruins. Yet even though the structures themselves are mostly gone, their stories remain. Ancient historians wrote about them, travelers described them, and generations of people continued to imagine what they must have looked like. Today, the Great Pyramid still stands quietly in the Egyptian desert. It is the last surviving wonder of the ancient list, but the others still live on through history and imagination. They remind us that the ancient world was full of creativity, skill, and ambition, and that even thousands of years ago, people were capable of building things that could inspire the world for centuries. Now, as the night grows quieter and the world slows down around you, you can simply let these ancient places fade gently into the distance. The desert winds moving softly across the sands of Giza, the quiet terraces of Babylon covered in green leaves, the peaceful temples of Greece standing beneath a bright blue sky, a bronze statue watching the sea, and a lighthouse shining across dark waters to guide ships safely home. These images belong to another time, another world far away from the noise and movement of today. A world of stone cities, quiet temples, and slow journeys across land and sea. And as these ancient scenes slowly drift away, you can relax and let your mind rest, knowing that somewhere beneath the same night sky, the stories of the ancient world continue to travel through time,